The morning sun painted the rice fields of New Hanul in golden light. Dae-ho Kim wiped sweat from his forehead as he walked between the neat rows of green plants. His weathered hands checked each stalk with the care of a father watching over children. At 45 years old, he had spent most of his life working this same land that his father had claimed when the first human settlers arrived 50 years ago. The farming planet of New Hanul was quiet and peaceful. Most days brought nothing more exciting than deciding which field to water or when to harvest the grain. Dae-ho liked it that way. The city folk who visited sometimes called his life boring, but he found deep satisfaction in the simple rhythm of planting, growing, and harvesting. He was checking the irrigation channels when the sky began to change. At first, it looked like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Dark shapes moved against the blue morning sky, growing larger with each passing moment. Dae-ho squinted and shaded his eyes with his hand. The shapes were too regular to be clouds, too organized to be a natural phenomenon. Then he heard the sound. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, but it grew stronger and more complex. There were harmonics in it, almost like singing, but deeper and more alien than any voice he had ever heard. The sound made his chest vibrate and sent chills down his spine. The shapes in the sky resolved into individual forms, and Dae-ho stumbled, backward in amazement. They were creatures unlike anything he had ever imagined. Each one was the size of a small building, with long, serpentine bodies and wings that caught the sunlight like stained glass windows. Their scales seemed to be made of crystal, shifting between colors as they moved through the air. Dragons. The word came to his mind unbidden, though these beings were far more beautiful and terrible than any dragon from ancient Earth stories. There were hundreds of them, moving in a great formation that darkened the sky above his farm. Their wings beat in unison, creating the rhythmic thunder that filled the air. As they drew closer, Dae-ho could see that their crystalline scales were not just beautiful, they were also damaged. Many of the creatures bore scars and dark patches where their natural luster had faded to a sickly gray. The formation began to descend, and Dae-ho realized with a mix of fear and wonder that they were heading directly for his farm. He should have run. Any sensible person would have grabbed what they could carry and fled to the village 3 kilometers away, but something in the way the creatures moved held him in place. Despite their size and alien appearance, there was something almost desperate in their flight, something that spoke of great need rather than aggression. The lead dragon, larger than the others, and with scales that shimmered between deep blue and silver, landed in the field just beyond his house. The impact shook the ground and sent his chickens squawking in terror. The other dragons settled around it, filling his fields and the meadow beyond with their massive forms. Up close, Dae-ho could see that these beings were magnificent and terrible in equal measure. Each dragon was easily 15 meters long, with intelligent eyes that reflected light like jewels. Their heads were elegant and serpentine, crowned with crystalline horns that caught and refracted the sunlight. But beneath the beauty, he could see signs of suffering. Their scales were dull in places, their movements spoke of exhaustion, and many bore what looked like wounds or disease. The lead dragon turned its great head toward him, and Dae-ho found himself looking into eyes that held intelligence and something that might have been hope. The creature opened its mouth and made a sound that was part roar, part song, and completely unlike anything in his experience. Then, to his amazement, a small device attached to the dragon's neck began to glow, and words emerged in heavily accented, but understandable human language. "Small groundwalker," the voice said, crackling with static. "We are Veltar. We come seeking help. Our people die. Our world dies. We have traveled far, asking many star peoples for aid. All have turned away. Will you also turn away?" Dae-ho stared at the creature, his mind struggling to process what was happening. First contact with an alien species, here on his quiet farm. The governments and scientists had always said that when humanity met other intelligent life, it would happen in space or at one of the major colony worlds. No one had imagined it would happen to a simple farmer in a rice field. The dragon waited, its great head tilted slightly as if trying to read his expression. Around them, the other members of the herd remained still, but Dae-ho could sense their tension, their desperate hope. "You're hurt," he said finally, his voice small in the face of such magnificence. "You're all hurt." The lead dragon's eyes widened slightly, as if surprised that he had noticed. "We are sick, yes. Our food is poisoned. Our children starve. The Star Peoples with great knowledge say nothing can be done. They say we should accept death with honor." Dae-ho looked around at the assembled herd, seeing now what he had missed before. These were not just adult dragons. Mixed among the larger forms were smaller ones, clearly young, their scales even more dulled than their parents. Some were barely the size of his house, children by dragon standards, and they were clearly suffering. The farmer in him responded before the frightened human could object. These were living beings in distress, far from home and seeking help. It didn't matter that they were alien, or that their very presence challenged everything he thought he knew about the universe. "Wait here," he said, surprising himself with his calm tone. "Let me get water and food, if you can eat what humans eat." The lead dragon's translator crackled again. "You will help us, even though we are strange to you, even though we bring trouble?" Dae-ho looked up at the magnificent creature and smiled. "My father always said that when someone comes to your door asking for help, you help first and ask questions later. Doesn't matter if they're human or not, I suppose." For the first time since their arrival, something that might have been hope flickered in the dragon's crystalline eyes. "I am Kivara, speaker for the herd. What are you called, kind groundwalker?" "Dae-ho," he replied, already walking toward his house to fetch water. "Dae-ho Kim. And welcome to New Hanul, I suppose." Behind him, he heard a sound like crystal chimes in the wind. It might have been alien laughter, or perhaps it was the sound of hope returning to a dying people. The news of the dragon arrival spread through the village faster than wildfire. By noon, half the settlement had gathered at the edge of Dae-ho's property, keeping a respectful distance but unable to resist staring at the magnificent alien beings resting in the fields. Ji-woo Park was the first to approach. She had been Dae-ho's neighbor for 10 years, ever since she left her corporate research job to try farming. Her background in botany made her curious rather than afraid when she saw the crystalline creatures. "Dae-ho," she called softly as she walked up to where he stood with buckets of water. "Are they really aliens?" "They are," he replied, still somewhat amazed by his own words. "They call themselves Veltar. They're sick and far from home." Ji-woo studied the dragons with scientific interest. "Their scales look like living crystal. I've never seen anything like the way they reflect light. What's wrong with them?" Before Dae-ho could answer, Kivara lifted her great head and spoke through her translator device. "We will explain, if the other groundwalkers wish to listen. Our story is long and sad, but perhaps understanding will help." More villagers arrived as the afternoon wore on. Hyun-sik Lee came with his toolbox, as if mechanical problems might need fixing. The village mechanic had a talent for solving impossible problems with whatever materials he could find. So Young Choi arrived with her medical bag, though she quickly realized that human medicine probably wouldn't help alien dragons. Min-ho John, the village leader, came to make sure everyone stayed safe. But like the others, he found himself drawn into fascination rather than fear. These creatures, despite their size and alien nature, seemed more like refugees than invaders. Kivara began to tell their story as the humans gathered in a loose circle around her. Her voice came through the translator with electronic crackles, but the pain in her words was clear in any language. Our world is called Velthara, she said. It is beautiful, made of crystal mountains and silicon valleys. We are old people, older than most star travelers. For thousands of your years, we lived in harmony with our world. The dragon's scales shifted color as she spoke, from blue to deep purple, reflecting her emotions. Our food comes from plants called lumara. They grow like crystal trees, taking minerals from the ground and light from our sun. They have fed our people since the beginning of memory. So Young leaned forward with interest. What happened to them? A plague came from space, Kivara continued, her scales darkening to an almost black shade. Tiny living things, smaller than dust, that attacked our Lumara forests. At first, only a few trees sickened. Their crystal branches turned gray and cracked. Their light dimmed and died. The dragon's great eyes reflected the afternoon sun as she remembered. We tried to stop it. Our wisest healers worked day and night. But the plague spread faster than we could fight it. Within one season, half our food forests were dead. Within 2 seasons, all were dying. Yunsik scratched his head thoughtfully. What did it look like, this plague? Like black spots on the crystal, Kivara replied. It would start small, then grow until it covered entire trees. The spots felt wrong. Cold where the crystal should be warm, dead where life should sing. Jiwoo's eyes widened with recognition. That sounds like some kind of fungal infection. We see similar things on Earth crops sometimes. The dragon turned to her with interest. What are fungi? Small living things that feed on other living things, Jiwoo explained. They can spread very fast and kill plants, but there are ways to fight them. Hope flickered in Kivara's crystalline eyes, but it faded quickly. We sought help from the star peoples, the Zentari, who are wise in the ways of healing, the Mordain, who know all sciences, the Kalef Confederacy, with their great machines that can see the smallest parts of existence. Her scales turned a sad gray color. All said the same thing. The plague was too strange, too different from anything they knew. Our crystal trees were not like their carbon plants. The sickness was beyond their knowledge. They told us to accept our fate with dignity. But you didn't accept it, Daeho observed quietly. Some did, Kivara admitted. Some of our people chose to die on our homeworld rather than flee. But others, like our herd, chose to search. We have traveled to 17 star systems, visited 43 worlds, spoken to 12 different species. All turned us away. So Young looked around at the assembled dragons, counting them with her medical eye. How many of you are there? This herd numbers 412, Kivara said. But we are not the only ones searching. There are 6 other herds scattered across the galaxy, all seeking hope where none seems to exist. The weight of their desperation settled over the gathered humans. Nearly 3,000 dying aliens searching the galaxy for help that no advanced civilization could provide. How long do you have? Minho asked gently. Without food, perhaps 2 of your months, Kivara replied. Our young even less. We have been traveling for 6 months already, growing weaker with each failed attempt to find aid. Jiwoo walked closer to the dragon, her scientific mind working. Can you show us what this plague looks like? Do you have samples of the infected crystal trees? Kivara's scales brightened slightly. We carry specimens, yes, for testing by those who might help. But the star peoples with great knowledge said the molecular structure was too alien, too complex for simple solutions. Maybe, Jiwoo said thoughtfully, but I've learned that sometimes the simplest solutions work best. My grandmother always said that the cure for most plant diseases is understanding how the plant wants to live. Hyunsik nodded agreement. In my workshop, the fanciest tools aren't always the ones that fix the problem. Sometimes you need to step back and think about what's really going wrong. So, Young smiled at the dragon. We may not be the most advanced species in the galaxy, but we've learned a few things about life and how to keep it healthy. Would you be willing to show us these samples? For the first time since their arrival, Kivara's scales shimmered with something that looked like hope. You would truly try to help us, even though the greatest minds in the galaxy have failed? Deho looked around at his neighbors, seeing determination in their faces. We're not the greatest minds in the galaxy, he said. We're just farmers and villagers who believe in helping our neighbors, but sometimes that's exactly what's needed. The dragon's translator crackled with what might have been laughter or tears. Then yes, kind groundwalkers, we will show you our dying trees and pray that your simple wisdom succeeds where complexity has failed. The next morning brought Deho's daughter Yunji back from the city. She had studied agricultural engineering at the university and worked for a big farming corporation. But the news of alien dragons seeking help from her father brought her home on the first transport. Dad, she said as she climbed out of the hover car, staring at the dragons resting in the fields. When the news said you were helping aliens, I thought they meant human colonists from another world. Deho smiled at his daughter. Life has a way of surprising us. Come meet Kivara. She's been telling us about their problem. Yunji approached the great dragon with the confident stride of someone used to dealing with complex agricultural challenges. I'm Yunji Kim, she said to Kivara. I understand you're having trouble with plant disease. If crystal trees can be called plants, Kivara replied through her translator, your father and his friends have shown more interest in our problem than species with technology beyond your understanding. Sometimes fresh eyes see things differently, Yunji said. Can you show me the infected samples? Kivara gestured with one massive wing toward a smaller dragon nearby. Velnoth carries our specimens, but be warned, the sight is not pleasant. These are pieces of our dying world. The smaller dragon approached and carefully opened a container that seemed to be made of the same crystal material as their scales. Inside, Deho could see fragments that had once been beautiful. The crystal structures were intricate and delicate like frozen music made visible. But dark patches spread across them like cancer, turning brilliant clarity into ugly gray-black. Stains. Ji Wu knelt beside the container, studying the samples with intense concentration. The infection pattern looks familiar, she said. It spreads in circles from central points, just like fungal infections on earth plants. So Young took out a small magnifying device from her medical kit. The dark areas look almost like they're consuming the crystal structure. It reminds me of certain bacterial infections that break down cell walls. Hyun-sik peered over their shoulders. What if it's not one problem but two problems working together? Like when rust and metal fatigue both attack a machine. Yunji nodded, thoughtfully. Dad, can I see your greenhouse? I want to try something. Deho led the group to the greenhouse where he started his seedlings and experimented with new crop varieties. It was a simple structure, nothing like the advanced laboratories that had failed to help the Veltar, but it was designed for growing life. What are you thinking? Ji Wu asked as Yunji examined the growing setup. The advanced species approached this like an engineering problem, Yunji explained. They tried to analyze the molecular structure and design a technological solution. But what if we treat it like what it is? A sick plant that needs to get better. She turned to Kivara. On your world, how do the Lumara normally grow? What do they need to be healthy? The dragon's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue color. They grow in groves, many trees together. They need mineral-rich soil and the light from our sun. The trees sing to each other through their roots, sharing nutrients and information. They're networked, Ji Wu said with excitement. Like the root systems of earth forests, the trees help each other survive. So Young looked up from her examination of the samples. What if the infection is interrupting that communication, making each tree fight alone instead of working together? Deho watched his daughter and neighbors work, feeling proud but also amazed. These people, who had never traveled to other stars or studied alien biology, were asking questions that apparently no advanced civilization had thought to ask. "Let's set up a test environment," Yunji suggested. "We'll try to recreate the conditions your trees need, but with some additions from Earth." "What kind of additions?" Kivara asked. Hyun-sik grinned. "The kind of simple solutions that fix problems when fancy ones don't work." Over the next several hours, the humans worked to modify a section of the greenhouse. They created a bed of mineral-rich soil mixed with compounds that Jiwoo thought might help. They installed lights that approximated the spectrum of the Veltar sun. Most importantly, they introduced several types of beneficial bacteria and fungi from Earth. "These tiny organisms help our plants fight disease," Jiwoo explained as she added them to the soil mixture. "They create healthy environments where bad infections can't take hold. Your advanced galactic friends probably tried to kill the infection directly," Hyun-sik added. "But sometimes the best way to fight something bad is to make the good stuff stronger." Yunji carefully placed one of the infected crystal tree samples into the prepared environment. "Now we wait and see what happens." "How long?" Kivara asked. "With Earth plants, we'd see changes in a few days," So-young replied. "But this is new territory for all of us." As they waited, more villagers arrived to help. Word had spread throughout the settlement that their neighbors were trying to solve a problem that had stumped the galaxy's greatest minds. Instead of being intimidated, the people of New Hanul were excited by the challenge. Minho organized food and supplies for the extended dragon herd. Others brought tools, materials, and expertise. The local school teacher, Haiwan Shin, arrived with her students to help document everything they learned. "Why are you all helping us?" Kivara asked as she watched the bustling activity. "We are strangers, aliens to your kind. We offer nothing in return." Daeho looked around at his community working together, then smiled at the great dragon. "Because that's what neighbors do," he said simply. "When someone needs help, you help. It doesn't matter if they're from down the road or from across the galaxy." The dragon's scales shimmered with colors that seemed to represent emotions too complex for human understanding. The star peoples spoke of trade agreements, resource exchanges, political advantages. None spoke of simple kindness. "Maybe that's why their solutions didn't work," Jiwoo suggested. "They were thinking about everything except what really mattered, helping a dying people live." As the sun set on the second day, something unexpected happened in the greenhouse. The infected crystal tree sample began to show the first signs of change. The dark patches weren't growing any larger, and in some places, they seemed to be shrinking. "Look," Yunji whispered, pointing to where new crystal growth was appearing at the edges of the infection. "It's fighting back!" For the first time since their arrival, Kivara's scales blazed with brilliant, joyful color. "Is it possible?" she asked. "Could your simple methods succeed where all others have failed?" "It's too early to know for sure," Daeho cautioned. "But it looks like we're on the right path." The dragon lifted her great head toward the stars that were just becoming visible in the darkening sky. "Then perhaps there is hope for the Veltar after all." 3 days passed with careful watching and careful hoping. The infected crystal tree sample in the greenhouse continued to show slow improvement, but progress was frustratingly gradual. The dark infection had stopped spreading, but it was still there, still threatening the health of the crystal structure. Yunji checked the sample every few hours, taking notes and adjusting the environmental conditions. Jiwoo monitored the soil chemistry, making sure the beneficial organisms were thriving. So-young observed the changes through her medical equipment, trying to understand how the healing process worked. But as the days wore on, some of the dragons began to lose hope again. "Perhaps this small improvement means nothing," said one of the younger dragons, a creature named Velkoth whose scales had dulled to a discouraged gray. The great minds of the galaxy also saw small signs of hope before their methods failed completely. Kivara tried to maintain optimism, but Deho could see the worry in her crystalline eyes. "The groundwalkers work with dedication," she said. "We must have patience." "Patience," Velkoth replied bitterly. "While our people die, and our world grows darker each day. How many more herds have we lost while we chase impossible dreams?" The argument spread through the dragon herd, creating tension that even the humans could feel. Some dragons believed they should return home to die with dignity among their own crystal forests. Others wanted to continue the search for help, but were losing faith that any help existed. Hyun-sik was in his workshop trying to build better monitoring equipment when disaster struck. He had been working on a device to measure the crystal growth more precisely, and in his enthusiasm, he knocked over a container of dirty water from his cooling system. The contaminated water spilled across his workbench and dripped through a crack in the floor, flowing directly into the greenhouse irrigation system below. "Oh no," he muttered, rushing downstairs to see what damage he had caused. The dirty water had mixed with the carefully prepared soil around the test sample. Instead of the clean, controlled environment they had created, the crystal tree was now surrounded by muddy, contaminated dirt full of random bacteria from Hyun-sik's workshop. "I ruined everything," he said miserably, as the others gathered to see what had happened. "All your careful work, and I destroyed it with my clumsiness." Yun-ji knelt beside the contaminated sample, expecting to see the infection spreading again, or the crystal structure dissolving completely. What she saw instead made her gasp with amazement. "Everyone, look at this," she whispered. The crystal tree sample was glowing, not with the harsh light of artificial illumination, but with the soft, natural radiance that healthy Lumara trees were supposed to have. More importantly, the dark infection patches were rapidly shrinking, being pushed back by healthy crystal growth. "What happened?" Kivara asked, her massive head looming over the greenhouse. Hyun-sik looked embarrassed. "I spilled dirty water from my workshop. It has oil, metal shavings, random bacteria, all kinds of contamination." So Young was already taking samples of the muddy mixture. "What specific bacteria would have been in your cooling water?" "I don't know exactly," Hyun-sik admitted. "It comes from the village water supply, plus whatever gets picked up in my workshop. Pretty much every common organism on New Hanul, I suppose." Jiwoo's eyes widened with understanding. "That's it. We were trying to be too careful, too scientific. We gave the crystal tree only the bacteria we thought would help. But what if it needed something we didn't expect?" "A random organism from your workshop water?" Yoonji asked. "Not random," Jiwoo corrected excitedly. "Natural, complete. We gave it a laboratory environment, but what it needed was a real ecosystem with all the messy complexity that involves." They watched in amazement as the crystal tree continued to heal. The infection wasn't just being stopped, it was being completely eliminated. Healthy crystal growth spread outward from multiple points, and the tree began to pulse with the rhythmic light that indicated active life. Within hours, the change was dramatic. The crystal structure had not only recovered its original clarity, but seemed even more vibrant than the healthy samples they had seen. The tree was actually thriving in the contaminated environment. Kivara's scales blazed with colors too bright to look at directly. "Impossible," she breathed. "In all our searching, in all the testing by the greatest minds in the galaxy, nothing like this has ever happened." "What makes it even more interesting," So Young observed, "is that the tree seems to be actively fighting the infection now. Look at these readings. It's producing compounds that break down the fungal structures." Hyun-sik scratched his head in confusion. "So my mistake fixed the problem?" "Your mistake gave us the real solution," Deho corrected gently. "Sometimes the best discoveries happen by accident, when we stop trying so hard to control everything." Word of the breakthrough spread quickly through the dragon herd. Creatures who had been preparing to leave in despair now crowded around the greenhouse, their scales shimmering with renewed hope. The young dragons, who had been the most discouraged, were now the most excited. "Can this method work on our world?" Velkoth asked, his scales now bright with anticipation. "Can we save our forests?" Yunji looked at her father and friends, seeing the same thought in all their eyes. "There's only one way to find out," she said, "but we'll need to scale this up dramatically, and we'll need to do it on your home world where the real infected forests are." "You would come with us?" Kivara asked in amazement. "You would leave your world to help save ours?" "If that's what it takes," Deho replied simply. The dragon's translator crackled with what could only be overwhelming emotion. The Star Peoples offered to sell us solutions if we had resources to trade. They demanded payment and guarantees, and political agreements. But you offer to leave your homes and risk your lives for strangers. Minho stepped forward, representing the village. "Some of us will need to stay here to take care of things, but others can go. Taijun O has been asking to volunteer since the first day. Haiwan Shin wants to document everything for scientific records. And I think our farmers have learned something that the rest of the galaxy needs to know." Jiwoo nodded agreement. "We've discovered that sometimes the most advanced solution is the most natural one. Complex problems don't always need complex answers. They need the right answers," So Young added. "And sometimes the right answer is surprisingly simple." As the sun set on that incredible day, the humans and dragons began planning for a journey that would take them across the galaxy. They would travel to a dying crystal world with nothing but simple farming knowledge, basic tools, and a contaminated soil mixture that had solved the impossible puzzle. "The other herds must be told," Kivara said. "If this method works on Velthara, we can save not just our herd, but our entire species." "One step at a time," Deho cautioned, though his eyes were bright with hope. "First, we see if what worked in a greenhouse can work on a planet." The great dragon looked down at the humble farmer who had offered water to strangers and accidentally saved a civilization. "I begin to understand why the universe brought us to your small world, Deho Kim. Perhaps wisdom is not found in the largest libraries or the most advanced laboratories." "Where then?" he asked. Kivara's scales shifted to a warm, grateful gold. "In the hearts of those who help without asking for anything in return, and in the workshops of those whose accidents reveal truths that careful planning could never find." The preparation for the journey to Velthara took 2 weeks. The dragons worked with human engineers to modify their ship to support human life during the long space voyage. The Veltar technology was beautiful and organic, grown rather than built, with crystalline corridors that hummed with life. Taejun O, a young farmer who had always dreamed of seeing other worlds, volunteered to lead the human mission. At 28, he was strong, curious, and unafraid of hard work. Beside him, Haiwan Shin packed her recording equipment and sample containers, determined to document everything they learned. So Young decided to join them as well, fascinated by the challenge of understanding alien biology. "If we're going to help heal a planet," she said, "we might need someone who understands how healing works." The most important cargo was not the humans, but the carefully prepared soil mixture that had created the breakthrough. Hyunsik had recreated his accidental contamination dozens of times, ensuring they understood exactly which organisms were necessary for the healing process. "Remember," Jiwoo told them as they prepared to leave, "the secret isn't just the bacteria. It's the complete ecosystem. The crystal trees need the same kind of natural, messy, complex environment that Earth plants thrive in." On the day of departure, the entire village gathered to see them off. The dragon ship rose from the fields like a living jewel, its crystalline hull reflecting the morning sun in patterns too beautiful for human eyes to fully comprehend. The journey to Velthara took 3 weeks, traveling through fold space in ways that human science was only beginning to understand. During the voyage, Tae-jun and his team learned more about dragon culture and the scale of the catastrophe awaiting them. Our world was once the most beautiful in this sector of the galaxy, Kivara explained as they traveled. Crystal forests covered 7 continents, each grove singing in harmony with the others. The music of growing Lumara could be heard from orbit. "What does it look like now?" Haewon asked. Kivara's scales darkened with sadness. Silent, gray, like a world where all the music has died. When they finally arrived at Velthara, the humans understood what she meant. The planet was breathtaking and heartbreaking at the same time. Vast crystal formations jutted from the surface like frozen cathedrals. But they were all the wrong color. Instead of the brilliant, living light that healthy Lumara should have shown, everything was dull gray-black, consumed by the spreading infection. The dragon cities were built into and around the crystal formations, organic structures that flowed like living art. But they too were dying. Their populations drastically reduced as starvation took its toll. "How many of your people are left?" So Young asked quietly. "Perhaps 60,000 on this continent," Kivara replied. "There were 500,000 when the plague began." The weight of those numbers settled heavily on the human volunteers, an entire civilization hanging by a thread, and they were here, with nothing but farming knowledge and a bucket of contaminated soil. But they had not come to doubt. They had come to work. The dragons provided them with a section of infected forest to use as a testing ground. The crystal trees here had been among the first affected, and the infection was so advanced that the structures were cracking and collapsing under their own weight. "If the method works here," Kivara said, "it will work anywhere." The humans set up their equipment and began the careful process of treating the soil around the infected trees. They worked in environmental suits that protected them from the alien atmosphere while allowing them to move freely through the crystal groves. The first challenge was scale. In the greenhouse on New Hanul, they had treated one small sample. Here, they needed to treat hundreds of massive crystal trees spread across kilometers of infected forest. "We can't do this one tree at a time," Tae-jun observed. "We need a way to spread the beneficial organisms more efficiently." Haewon studied the root systems of the Lumara trees, finding that they were even more interconnected than Earth forests. "Look at this," she called excitedly. "The trees share everything through their root networks. If we can establish healthy organisms in just a few key locations, they should spread naturally through the entire grove." So Young worked with dragon biologists to understand how the healing process might work on a planetary scale. "The trees communicate chemically," she explained. "Once some of them start producing the antifungal compounds, they'll share that information with their neighbors." They began with 12 trees in the center of the grove, carefully introducing the earth organisms that had created the breakthrough. The work was slow and precise, requiring patience that was difficult to maintain when an entire species was depending on their success. For the first week, nothing seemed to happen. The treated trees showed no visible change, and some of the dragons began to despair again. "Perhaps it works only in artificial environments," suggested one of the local dragon elders. "Perhaps the real world is too complex for such simple solutions." But Tae-jun refused to give up. On New Hanul, it took several days to see results with one small sample. "We're treating an entire forest. It might take longer, but the principle should be the same." On the 8th day, Haewon noticed the first sign of change. "The root networks are becoming more active," she reported. "I'm seeing increased chemical communication between the treated trees and their neighbors." On the 10th day, So Young detected the first antifungal compounds being produced by the crystal structures. "They're fighting back," she announced. "The trees are learning how to heal themselves." On the 12th day, the impossible happened. The crystal trees began to sing. It started as a barely audible hum, so low that the humans felt it more than heard it. But gradually the sound grew stronger and more complex. Individual trees added, their voices to a growing chorus that spread outward through the grove. "I had almost forgotten that sound," Kivara whispered, her scales blazing with joy. "It has been silent for so long." As the song grew stronger, the visual changes became dramatic. The gray-black infection began to retreat, pushed back by healthy, crystal growth that pulsed with living light. The trees were not just healing, they were thriving, becoming more vibrant than they had been even before the plague. "It's working," Taijun said in amazement. "Not just working, it's working better than we ever imagined." The healing spread faster than anyone had expected. The beneficial organisms, once established, propagated through the root networks with incredible efficiency. Within days, entire sections of forest were recovering. Within weeks, the effect had spread to neighboring groves. Dragon communities that had been preparing for extinction suddenly found themselves surrounded by growing, singing forests. Food that had been scarce for months became abundant again. Young dragons who had been weakening from hunger began to recover their strength and their brilliant colors. "How is this possible?" asked the dragon elder who had doubted the human methods. "The greatest minds in the galaxy said this problem was impossible to solve." So Young smiled as she watched the crystal trees pulse with healthy light. "Maybe that was the problem. They thought it was impossible, so they looked for impossible solutions. We thought it was just a sick forest that needed to get better." News of the success spread across Velthara and out to the scattered dragon herds still searching the galaxy for help. One by one, they began to return home, bringing with them the knowledge that salvation had come from the most unlikely source. "We owe you a debt that can never be repaid," Kivara told the humans as they prepared to return to New Hanul. "You have given us back our world, our future, our children's songs." Taejun looked out over the restored crystal forest, listening to the harmony of a million trees singing together. "We didn't do anything special," he said. "We just treated you like neighbors who needed help." But even as he spoke, he knew that something very special had indeed happened. A simple act of kindness had saved an entire species, and the galaxy would never be quite the same. 6 months after the first crystal trees began to sing again on Velthara, something happened that no one had expected, not even in their most optimistic dreams. The restored forests were not just healthy, they were better than they had ever been before. Hei-1 was the first to notice it during her regular monitoring visits. "The Lumara trees in the treated areas are producing 30% more nutritious crystals than the historical averages," she reported to the gathered humans and dragons. "And they're showing resistance to 12 different types of infections that used to affect them regularly." So Young had been studying the biological changes in detail. The combination of Earth organisms and Veltar biology has created something entirely new. The trees have developed an immune system that they never had before. Kivara's scales shimmered with wonder. "For thousands of years, our people accepted that periodic plagues were part of life. Trees would sicken, groves would die, and we would plant new ones. We never imagined they could be made truly healthy. But the changes went far beyond disease resistance. The restored crystal forests were growing faster, living longer, and producing varieties of food crystals that had never existed before. Some groves were developing new colors and new songs, expanding the range of Veltar music in ways that delighted their artistic culture. The news attracted attention from across the galaxy. The first visitors were scientists from the Zentari Collective, the same species that had turned the dragons away months earlier. Their sleek ships landed near the restored forests, and teams of researchers emerged with complex instruments and skeptical expressions. "Impossible," declared their chief scientist after examining the crystal forests. "Our models clearly showed that this type of infection was irreversible. These results cannot be accurate. Taejun watched the alien scientists struggle to understand what they were seeing. Maybe your models were based on wrong assumptions, he suggested politely. Wrong assumptions? The Zentari scientists' skin patterns shifted to indicate offense. We have studied biological systems for longer than your species has existed. Our technology can manipulate matter at the molecular level. But can it help sick plants get better? Haewon asked innocently. The Zentari had no answer for that simple question. More species arrived as word spread. The Mordain Confederation sent their greatest minds. The Caliph brought machines that could see individual atoms. Even the mysterious Void Walkers, who rarely interacted with other species, came to investigate. All of them had the same reaction: disbelief, followed by desperate attempts to understand how simple Earth organisms had solved a problem their advanced science could not. "We need samples," demanded a Mordain researcher. "Complete genetic sequences of all organisms involved. Full documentation of every step in the process." "We need to understand the mechanism," insisted a Caliph engineer. "There must be some technology here that we have missed." But when the alien scientists tried to reproduce the human success using their own methods, they failed. Their sterile laboratories and precise measurements could not recreate the messy, natural ecosystem that made the healing possible. "You must tell us your secrets," pleaded a Zentari diplomat. "Our people face similar problems on 17 worlds. We will trade advanced technology, rare materials, anything you desire." Daeho, who had come to Velthara to see the results of their work, smiled at the desperate aliens. "There are no secrets," he said. "We treat sick plants like sick plants. We give them what they need to be healthy. What they need is complex chemistry and precise environmental controls," the Zentari argued. "What they need," Jiwoo corrected, "is to be part of a living community where different organisms help each other survive." The alien scientists could not understand this concept. Their civilizations had long ago separated themselves from natural ecosystems, relying on technology to provide everything they needed. The idea that complex problems might have simple natural solutions was literally incomprehensible to them. But other species were beginning to listen. Representatives from dozens of worlds came to New Hanul, seeking help with their own agricultural problems. Planets where crops were failing, where soil had become poisoned, where entire ecosystems were collapsing under the weight of over-technology. The humans shared their knowledge freely, asking for nothing in return. They taught alien species how to work with natural processes instead of trying to control them completely. They showed them that sometimes the best solution was to step back and let life find its own way. The results were remarkable. World after world reported success using modified versions of the human approach. Agricultural yields increased, ecosystems recovered, and species that had been on the brink of extinction began to thrive again. Within 2 years, humanity had become known throughout the galaxy as the gardeners of the galaxy, the species that could make life flourish where others saw only problems to be solved with technology. "How did you know?" asked a young dragon named Velsin, who had been just a hatchling when the plague began. "How did you know that the answer was so simple when all the great minds of the galaxy said it was impossible?" Daeho was working in his expanded greenhouse, now a research center where humans and aliens learned together. "We didn't know," he admitted. "We just did what felt right." "But what if you had been wrong?" the young dragon pressed. "What if your simple methods had failed like all the others?" Daeho paused in his work and looked at the young dragon with kind eyes. "Then we would have tried something else, and if that failed, we would have tried again. That's what neighbors do. They keep trying until they find a way to help." The dragon's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue color. "The star peoples who came before you gave up when their first attempts failed. They said the problem was too complex for simple solutions. Maybe that was their mistake, suggested Yunji, who had established a permanent research station on Velthara. They started with the assumption that complex problems need complex solutions. We started with the assumption that sick plants need to get better. 5 years after that first morning when dragons descended from the sky seeking help, Daiho received a visit from Kivara. The great dragon was older now, her scales showing the silver traces that came with age and wisdom. "I bring news from the Council of Herds," she announced. "The restoration of Velthara is complete. Every forest sings with health. Our population has grown beyond what it was before the plague began." "That's wonderful news," Daiho replied, genuinely happy for his alien friends. "But that is not why I came," Kivara continued. "I came to ask you a question that has puzzled our people for years. When we first arrived, desperate and dying, why did you help us? You gained nothing from it. You risked everything. Why?" Daiho considered the question seriously. It was one that galactic historians and alien philosophers had been debating since the story became known across the stars. "Because you needed help," he said finally, "and we could give it. It really was that simple." Kivara's scales shimmered with the deep contentment that dragons showed when they encountered a truth that resonated in their crystal hearts. "And that," she said, "is why the universe brought us to your door. Not because you had the most advanced technology or the greatest knowledge, but because you had something the galaxy had forgotten." "What's that?" "The wisdom to know that the most advanced solution is sometimes also the most simple one, and the courage to help strangers without asking what you will gain in return." As the dragon prepared to leave, she turned back one more time. "The galaxy is different now because of what happened here. Species that had forgotten how to work with nature are remembering. Worlds that were dying are learning to live again. And it all began with one farmer who offered water to strangers." Daiho smiled as he watched his friend fly away toward the stars. In the distance, he could hear the song of crystal trees growing in his expanded gardens, a harmony of earth and Veltar life working together to create something beautiful and new. The unthinkable had indeed happened. A simple act of kindness had not only saved one species, but had reminded an entire galaxy of something they had lost in their pursuit of ever more complex solutions. Sometimes the most advanced answer was also the most human one.